Bathroom carpet was a genuine phenomenon in Britain from the late 1950s through the 1980s. The reasoning was simple: warmth. British homes were cold, central heating was either non-existent or kept at Arctic temperatures to save money, and nobody wanted bare feet on freezing tiles after getting out of the bath. Carpet offered softness and comfort, turning the bathroom from purely utilitarian to almost cozy. There were sensible versions and extreme versions, like shag pile running wall to wall and sometimes even up the side of the bath itself. Post-war Britain had newfound prosperity, and fitted carpet had recently become affordable for ordinary families rather than just the wealthy. Carpeting your entire home, bathroom included, signaled you'd arrived socially. The rest of the world found this baffling. Americans and Europeans immediately thought about mold, mildew, and water soaking into those fibers, but British homeowners seemed cheerfully unbothered. The good towels were a peculiar British institution that emerged sometime in the mid-20th century. These were towels that lived in bathrooms but were absolutely not to be touched. They hung decoratively from rails or sat folded on racks, often in coordinating shades of peach or mint green. If you were visiting and reached for one after washing your hands, you'd get a sharp look from your host. The good towels were for show, not for drying. This was part of a broader British approach to nice things, this idea that the best stuff should be saved for a special occasion that never quite arrived. Families would have entire sets of china that never left the cabinet or furniture covered in plastic sheeting. The good towels were the bathroom equivalent, pristine and useless, waiting for guests important enough to warrant their use, which in practice meant they just gathered dust. Every middle-class home had one, the room you walked past daily but never entered. The door stayed shut, curtains half-drawn, furniture wrapped in protective plastic that squeaked and stuck to your skin if you dared sit down. This was the good room, the parlour, the best room, preserved for occasions that barely came. In Irish homes from the 1950s onwards, it held the Sacred Heart picture above the mantelpiece, best china locked behind glass, armchairs nobody sat in Victorian American families, kept their parlours just as fiercely protected. Children knew the rules without being told. You didn't run through it, didn't touch the surfaces, didn't leave fingerprints on anything polished. The room opened for 3 events: family celebrations like weddings, visits from the priest or bank manager, and wakes when someone died. Otherwise, it sat empty and unheated, waiting for a formality we've mostly abandoned. British living rooms have always contained certain objects that exist purely for display. The good cushions plumped and arranged just so, the ornamental figurines lined up on the mantelpiece, the coffee table books nobody's allowed to actually read. These things weren't necessarily expensive heirlooms, just ordinary household items elevated to protected status through sheer domestic routine. You learned quickly which ornaments could be dusted and which were too delicate to risk touching. The remote control got passed around the family every evening, yet somehow it still had to be returned to one specific spot afterward. Some homes had plastic-covered sofas crackling under you to preserve fabric nobody would ever really feel. Others had decorative towels in the bathroom or special mugs reserved strictly for guests. Even the nice rug wasn't for actual walking on. It was about maintaining order in a small domestic kingdom where everything had its designated place, and moving something without permission meant genuinely upsetting the household's invisible architecture. The kettle shaped British life in ways most people never consciously noticed. It lived permanently on the hob or worktop, always within arm's reach, because you'd use it 6 or 8 times a day, every morning to start, elevances around 11, tea time at 3 or 4, and another round after dinner. This made the kitchen the natural gathering point of any home. The kettle became the household's reset button. Bad news arrived, you put the kettle on. Someone dropped by unexpectedly, the kettle went on before you even said hello. Awkward silence during a disagreement. Someone would slip off to make tea, and that pause somehow fixed things. The simple act of filling it, switching it on, and waiting those few minutes while it heated created a daily rhythm. It marked transitions between activities and gave people an excuse to stop, gather, and actually talk to each other. Afternoon tea became fashionable in the 1840s thanks to the Duchess of Bedford, and tea got cold fast when people were chatting. The cosies solved this by wrapping the teapot in fabric that trapped warm air inside. Early versions were made from linen or heavy materials like velvet, often covered in embroidery and lace. You had to lift the whole thing off to pour your tea. In 1892, the bachelor cosy appeared with holes for the spout and handle, so you didn't have to keep removing it. The name suited lazy bachelors who couldn't be bothered with all that lifting. Victorians loved decorating everything in sight, and the tea cosy became another household item to embellish and show off. What started as practical insulation turned into an oddly treasured household fixture. British homes had this space called either the pantry or the larder, depending on which part of the country you lived in. In older houses built from the 1930s onward, you'd get a proper walk-in room with tiled shelves that stayed cool. Inside was a system that looked chaotic to everyone, except the person who'd organized it, usually the mother, or sometimes a particularly fastidious father. Tins were absolute nightmares because they're round and won't stack properly, and they'd end up 2 or 3 deep where the back ones vanished for years. Biscuits lived up high to stop children raiding them, and there'd always be 3 boxes of digestives because someone kept buying more without checking. The backup tea had a sacred spot, and running out was treated like a household emergency. Everything had invisible zones that made perfect sense to one person and baffled everyone else trying to find the curry powder or wondering why there were 4 jars of marmalade. It's a universal experience. You spot a tin of biscuits, prise open the lid, expecting treats, and discover sewing supplies. Or buttons, or batteries. Anything except biscuits. The story starts in 1831 when Huntley and Palmer's invented the first decorative biscuit tin in Reading, England. These weren't disposable containers. The tins were airtight, waterproof, and rat-proof, making them useful once the biscuits were gone. Giving someone biscuits in a fancy tin was essentially a double gift. The middle classes loved them because they were affordable luxury without breaking the bank. By the 1920s, people were already stashing sewing kits inside. Most families had sewing supplies that needed storing, and they had this perfectly good tin sitting around. Why buy a new box when you've got one at home? Royal Dansk tins, appearing in 1966, became the face of this phenomenon. Their signature blue design and generous round shape made them ideal for hoarding just about anything. The practice spread so widely that Reddit users created a world map tracking which countries experienced the biscuit tin surprise. Turns out it's basically everywhere. Before homes had constant hot water on tap, running a bath or doing the washing meant working to a strict timetable. Most households had an immersion heater in a storage tank or a timed boiler that switched on for a few hours each day. You might get hot water from 6 until 8 in the morning and again from 5 until 7 in the evening. Outside those windows, the water ran cold. This meant everyone had to plan around the schedule. Baths happened on set nights, usually once a week, because heating water cost money. Mothers timed the washing to coincide with the hot water window. If you missed it, you either waited until tomorrow or boiled kettles on the stove. Some families turned their immersion on manually when they needed it, but then worried about forgetting to switch it off. The meter ticked away and electric was expensive. Running out of hot water halfway through a bath was common. In most households, bathing wasn't something you just did whenever you felt like it. It was scheduled, usually on Saturday night, so everyone would be clean for church on Sunday morning. The whole operation revolved around hot water, or rather the lack of it. Heating water took time and fuel, whether that meant boiling pans on the coal range or waiting for the immersion heater to do its work, and nobody wanted to waste either. Families worked out a rotation system. Sometimes the youngest went first while the water was hottest, sometimes the oldest depending on who needed it most or who hollered loudest. Either way, the later you went, the colder and grimier the water got. Some families shared the same bathwater, topping it up between bathers to stretch things out. The bathroom itself was freezing in winter since heating rarely reached that far, so getting in was torture and getting out was worse. You scrubbed behind your ears, washed your hair with a flannel, and got yourself sorted for the week ahead. That one bath had to last until next Saturday. The airing cupboard was a small heated cupboard found in countless British homes, usually tucked near the landing or bathroom. Inside sat the hot water cylinder, that big metal tank storing all your household's hot water. The cylinder gave off steady background heat, and previous generations figured out they could use this warmth for something practical. Shelves, usually slatted to let air flow, surrounded the tank. People stored towels, bedding, pillowcases, and freshly washed clothes inside. The gentle heat, dried damp fabrics kept linens fresh smelling and prevented that musty odor that crept into things in Britain's damp climate. Stepping out of the shower and wrapping yourself in a warm towel from the airing cupboard felt luxurious without costing a penny extra. The cupboard wasn't heated on purpose, it simply recycled warmth already being produced. This made it brilliantly efficient. Modern combi boilers don't need hot water tanks, so airing cupboards became less common, but homes that still have them treasure the space for its cozy practicality and that small everyday comfort it provides. When the British weather turned damp and you didn't own a tumble dryer, laundry became a household obstacle course. Wet clothes ended up draped over radiators, flung across banisters, or hung on collapsible racks that took over entire rooms. In flats and houses across the country, this was just how things worked. The visual chaos was unmistakable: socks dangling from every surface, shirts blocking doorways, jeans hanging stiff off bedroom radiators. People told themselves it was energy saving, and in one sense it was, since you weren't running an electric dryer. But covering a radiator with wet clothes forced your boiler to work harder, pushing up heating costs while trapping moisture indoors. That moisture encouraged mold in poorly ventilated spaces, and the damp fabric blocked heat from circulating. Rooms felt colder despite the heating being on. Still, when rain hammered down for days, you draped and hoped for the best. There's this peculiarly British approach to cold weather that confuses people from other countries. Instead of just turning up the thermostat when it gets chilly, you put on another jumper, or you grab a blanket, or you fill up a hot water bottle and carry it around like a portable radiator. This habit comes down to a few things working together. First, energy bills are expensive, and they've been getting worse. Heating an entire house costs serious money, especially if you live in one of those draughty Victorian places with single-pane windows and gaps around the doors. Second, there's a cultural thing where enduring a bit of cold is seen as sensible rather than miserable. People genuinely take pride in holding out until 1st October or even later before switching on the heating. You'll hear them say it like an achievement. The idea is you heat yourself, not the empty air in rooms you're not using. It's practical, but it's also become part of the British identity somehow. For most of the 20th century, the typical British household didn't heat the whole house. They heated one room and everyone squeezed into it. This wasn't laziness or poor planning, it was simple economics. Fuel cost money, and heating multiple rooms all day was an expense most families couldn't justify. A survey from 1942 found that about 74% of working-class households heated just one room during winter, usually the kitchen sitting room or the main living room, whichever had the fireplace or the stove. The rest of the house stayed cold. Bedrooms were freezing, hallways were draughty, and if you needed the bathroom in the night, you braced yourself for it. Family life centered around that one warm space. Everyone ate there, sat there, did homework there, listened to the wireless there. You didn't wander off to other rooms because they were too cold to stay in for long. Net curtains are those light mesh or lace panels you hang across your windows to let daylight in, while stopping anyone outside from seeing what you're up to inside. They started as expensive lace in the 1900s, handmade and intricate, a proper luxury item. But after World War II, cheap man-made fabrics like polyester turned nets into something anyone could afford, and they spread through British suburbs like wildfire. The reason they became so popular was all about privacy mixed with nosiness. The middle classes wanted to hide their interiors from neighbours who might judge their decor or thieves who might nick things, but they also wanted to watch the street without being spotted. This led to the famous twitching net curtain, where someone pulls it back just enough to spy on what's happening outside. Europeans found this bizarre because they generally don't bother covering their windows, but that approach never caught on in Britain. Net curtains became the defining symbol of suburban life, that perfect combination of hiding yourself while keeping an eye on everyone else. A peculiar domestic practice took hold in the mid-20th century, especially among working-class and immigrant families. You purchased new furniture after considerable expense, then immediately covered it in thick, clear plastic. Custom-fitted vinyl sheets encased every surface. The reasoning seemed sound. Protect the fabric from stains, spills, children, pets, and general wear. Keep it pristine for decades. Sitting on plastic coverings was genuinely uncomfortable, though. The material squeaked and crackled with movement. During hot weather, your bare skin stuck to the surface, peeling away with a wet suction sound. In cold weather, the plastic cracked. Many families never removed the coverings, meaning they never truly experienced the furniture they worked hard to afford. The sofa remained perfect beneath its transparent shield, preserved for occasions that rarely arrived. It was protection verging on paranoia, domestic pride entangled with fear that hard-earned possessions might wear out before being paid off. The drawing room mantelpiece was the showcase for a family's taste and wealth. You'd find matching garniture sets of ceramics arranged symmetrically, usually 3 or 5 pieces, sitting at eye level. Candlesticks, ornamental vases, and china plates competed for space alongside stuffed birds or wax flowers preserved under glass domes. By the late Victorian period, this arrangement had spread across the entire room. Ornamental cabinets displayed more china, occasional tables held picture frames, and walls were covered in gilt-framed prints. The Victorians called this bric-a-brac collecting, and it turned homes into miniature museums. Every surface had something on it. Middle-class families couldn't necessarily afford rare antiquities, but they could buy mass-produced figurines and decorative plates that suggested refinement. The key was density, though. An empty mantelpiece looked bare and poor. A cluttered one, arranged just so with symmetry and matching colours, proved you had money and knew how to spend it properly. British hallways were where the draft war was fought most intensely. The front door took the full force of Atlantic wind, the back door leaked cold air from the garden, and the stairwell acted as a chimney pulling warm air straight upwards. Door snakes became the first line of defence. These were fabric tubes filled with sand, rice, or old tights stuffed with scraps. Some families made them from old stockings or trouser legs. Others bought them ready-made from hardware shops for a few quid. Heavy curtains went up behind front doors, floor-length thick material that trapped cold air in the gap between door and curtain. In really draughty Victorian terraces, you'd see improvised barriers everywhere, rolled towels, cushions wedged into gaps, blankets hung over frames on cold nights. The hallway became a kind of airlock zone where multiple layers of defence kept the cold outside and the warmth where you actually live.